please welcome this year's opening VBK speaker, Dave Urso.
My job is to grease the wheels a little bit, which is really easy when there's such amazing talent coming right behind me. Today, I'm going to give you 3 challenges that I hope you can implement as a result of spending the time with us today. The first is about understanding that it starts with yourself. The second is finding the courage to actually implement what you're challenged to do. And the third is committing to do one thing differently. And that's the path I want to walk you down. The first challenge that I told you about is realizing it starts with yourself. For a lot of us, we do not realize we cannot be someone else's hero until we slay our own dragons. A lot of leadership is about reflecting on our own experiences first. What do we do well? What do we struggle with? How are we trying to change our community and the spot we're in? That involves vulnerability. That involves being willing to have a reflective look at our own personality, our own experiences, and push ourselves to look differently. A major research institution recently did a study in which they looked at mid and senior level management across America and found that 94% of these individuals engaged in little to no personal reflection on an annual basis. That study doesn't exist. I made it up for the purpose of making a point this afternoon when I'm with you. But it sounded convincing, didn't it? Because we realize we don't do it. It's not natural to go hike up Old Rag and think about, am I leading the right way? Am I parenting the right way? Am I changing lives as I intend to? But having vulnerability is what puts us in the ability to actually make that implementable difference in the lives of those we touch on a regular basis. I don't know how you go after that, but for me, it's all about the mentorships I pursue. The people I let closest to me, who I ask to challenge me and push me to think about the world in new and different ways. The truth about real mentorship is it's not a venting person who simply endorses everything you're already thinking, but challenges how you think. How are you exposing yourself to people who will fundamentally say, I hear what you're saying, but have you considered a different path? Have you pushed a different button? Have you done this in the past and asked for a different result, then it's try to go a different way? We have to surround ourselves by people who intentionally push us to be different, greater, and better. And we can't ask that of someone else until we've done it for ourselves. So the first of the 3 is to challenge you to realize it starts with yourself. Find that mentor in your life. Pursue that mentor. Formalize the relationship. Say, can you be someone I can count on a regular basis to make sure I'm doing everything I can, contributing in every way that I can? The second step is about finding the courage, and finding that courage isn't always easy. Our culture is so special in the Shenandoah Valley because we take care to make sure we're uplifting one another, protecting one another, and even when we have things like bless his heart, which it took me way too long of living into the valley to realize wasn't actually a compliment. It takes courage sometimes to have that candid moment with someone else. Sometimes to look at them and go, here's the deal. I have a vision for our organization. I have a vision for my team. And where you are now is not helping us get closer to that vision. So I need more from you. I need you to understand and be a part of that. When I was a young manager, I struggled with that a lot because I couldn't separate the fact of needing the courage to have that difficult conversation from the emotional base that drove it. And I found myself in trouble in a lot of times because I would be losing sleep for nights before I had to do that. I would find myself crying in a car after I had a difficult conversation with someone. There's a leader I still respect now who says every time he has a difficult conversation, he has to go vomit before he can have that conversation. And I don't talk about vomit in my only VBK opportunity to be with you all for any reason other than to say we try to numb ourselves to that emotion, and I'm here to beg you, rather than numb yourself, realize that that emotion is actually the thing that's going to help you have that candid moment more than anything else. Emotion is what makes us be humans who connect with other humans. And when we separate emotion from our interaction, we give ourselves permission not to be human. We give ourselves permission not to look at the other person we're talking to as another person who has all the same features we do, all the same external forces we do, but look at them as simply a role player. We are at a time where it's so easy to get an ego boost. I know right now I could post a selfie on Instagram and get somewhere between 10 and 12 likes. That makes me feel good about myself. I also know I could post a picture of my 5-year-old daughter on Belle on Instagram and get somewhere between 100 and 150 likes. I have come to terms with this. My therapist has told me it's because she's shorter and the camera reflects better off her cheeks. I'm sold. I haven't looked at the science, but it makes sense. It takes courage, but we have to do it anyway. That's what it's about, is doing it anyway. That's the third challenge, guys, that I hope you will take back to your organizations with you. I love this community. I've been in this community a long time, but I see a future for this community where we're a little bit better than we are today. And that starts by doing something different. If you're like me, you're going to have a really good day today. You're going to take notes. You're going to go home. You're going to talk about what you heard about today. You're going to go to work tomorrow. The notes are going to go top of your desk. Then next week, 3 projects are going to come in. It's going to drop a little lower on the pile. Then the next week, more projects will come in and it'll drop until eventually it'll get filed because you say, I'll go back and pull the file. And 6 months from now, we shred it and we lost the momentum. When you go back to your organization, go all in. Find the project you've been delaying. If you don't know the thing you need to pull the trigger on, then ask yourself some simple questions. Ask yourself if you knew you were going to be walking away from your organization 6 months from now. What would be the several things you would make sure you got done before you left so the person who next stepped into your shoes was set up for success? That's your candid opportunity to have courage and make a change. If you don't think that way, ask yourself, what would the new me do within their first couple weeks of being here? Because that's the easy things to pull on and make a meaningful change to what happened. And if you're really courageous, ask yourself this. What would happen if we took the president of the Bank of the James and the principal of Harrisonburg High School and swapped them for a week? And told them at the end of that week to sit down and say, in only doing your job for a week, I found these opportunities to improve the way you serve clients or serve students. We're fortunate in this valley that we live in our bubble, but that bubble keeps us from challenging one another sometimes to find new heights. If we commit to these 3 things, doing the self-reflection that pushes us further, finding the courage to actually move forward on projects that have stalled and growth that is stunted, and doing one thing differently as a result of being here today, our community will grow alongside us. And much like you, that's a community I would love to live in, be in, raise my family in, and spend the rest of my days in. Thank you all so very much. Thank you.
Please welcome to the Valley Business Keynote stage, Kim Scott.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here today. Radical candor is really a very simple idea, but if each of you can put it into practice, it will help you not only do the best work of your lives, but build teams where everyone can do the best work of their lives. And even more importantly, from my perspective, it'll help you build the best relationships of your career. In order to explain what I mean by radical candor, I want to start by telling you a simple story about a time when my boss criticized me. I had just started working at Google, and I had to give a presentation to the founders and the CEO about how the AdSense business was doing. And I walked into the room, and there in one corner was Sergey Brin, one of the founders, on an elliptical trainer in a bright blue spandex unitard and toe shoes. And in the other corner was Eric Schmidt, the CEO, doing his email, and he was so deep into his email, it was like his brain had been connected to his machine. And like any normal person in this situation, I felt a little bit nervous. How in the world was I supposed to get their attention? Luckily for me, the AdSense business was on fire. And when I explained how many new customers we had added over the last couple of months, Eric, the CEO, almost fell off his chair. He said, "What did you say? Do you need more marketing dollars? Do you need more engineers? How can we help you keep this going?" So I'm feeling like the meeting's going all right. In fact, I'm feeling like a genius. And as I left the room, I passed by my boss, who was Sheryl Sandberg, and I'm expecting kind of a high five, a pat on the back. And instead, Sheryl says to me, "Why don't you walk back to my office with me?" And I thought, oh boy, I screwed something up, and I'm sure I'm about to hear about it. And Sheryl started the conversation by telling me about the things that had gone well in the meeting. Not in a feedback sandwich. I think there's a less polite term for that. But not sort of in a kick me, kiss me, kick me kind of way, but really telling me some things that she seemed to mean that I hadn't realized before then that had gone well. But of course, all I wanted to hear about was what I had done wrong. And eventually, Sheryl said to me, "You said a lot in there. Were you aware of it?" And at that point, I breathed a huge sigh of relief, and I kind of made this brush-off gesture, because if that was all I had done wrong, who really cared? I had a tiger by the tail. And I said, "Yeah, I know, it's a verbal tic. It's no big deal, really." And then Sheryl said to me, "I know this great speech coach, and I bet Google would pay for it. Would you like an introduction?" And once again, I made this brush-off gesture with my hand, and I said, "No, I'm busy. Didn't you hear about all those new customers? I don't have time to go to a silly speech coach. And then Cheryl stopped. She looked me right in the eye, and she said, Kim, I can see when you do that thing with your hand that I'm going to have to be a lot more direct with you. When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid. Now she's got my full attention. Cardinal sin at Google is stupidity. Now, don't be evil. It's don't be stupid, right? So now I'm really struggling. I realize that I've really done something wrong. Nobody wants to feel like they just look stupid in front of the CEO and the founders of a company. And some people would say that it was mean of Cheryl to say that I sounded stupid, but it was actually the kindest thing she could have done for me at that moment in my career. Because if she hadn't said it to me in just those words, and by the way, she wouldn't have used those words to other people on her team who might not have made this brush-off gesture, who might have heard her the first time. But if she hadn't said it to me in just those words, I would never have gone to see the speech coach. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have learned that Cheryl was not exaggerating. They videotaped me giving a presentation, one of life's most painful situations, made me watch myself on video. And I literally did say every third word. And this was news to me. I had been giving presentations for my entire career. I had raised a couple of startup companies and raised millions of dollars giving presentations. I thought I was pretty good at it. And it was almost like a sudden realization that I had been walking through my entire career with my fly down, and nobody had told me. Like, I could zip it up if I knew it was down, but and so why had nobody told me in my whole career? Because I gave presentations all the time. And then I started thinking about Cheryl. And what was it about Cheryl that made it so seemingly natural and easy for her to give me the feedback? And I realized that when it came to Cheryl, it really boiled down to two things. Cheryl cared about me, not just as an employee, but as a human being. When I moved, I had lived in New York. When I moved from New York to California to take the job at Google, I didn't really know anybody. And Cheryl could tell I was lonely and invited me to join a book club, knowing that I loved to read. When I had a family member fall ill, Cheryl said, I am going to write your coverage plan. You go get on an airplane. Your place is at home right now. We've got you covered at work. We're part of a team, and that's what we do for each other. And that was the sort of thing that Cheryl did, not just for me, but for everyone who worked directly with her. She couldn't, of course, do it for all 8,000 people in her organization. But for the people who Cheryl worked closely with, you knew she had your back. She cared about you at a very deep and human level. But she never let her concerns for your feelings get in the way of telling you very directly when you screwed something up. And so that was really all it was: care personally, challenge directly. Now, I spent 2 years at business school, 1 summer at McKinsey Consulting. And in that period of time, I learned one important thing. All of life's problems can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. So this is the radical candor framework. Care personally, challenge directly. So let's take each dimension in turn. First, care personally. This is what I like to think of as the give dimension of radical candor. Like, at the very least, you want to show common human decency towards the people who you work with. Now, what is it that moves us down on this dimension? I've never worked with a single leader who said to me, I don't care at all about other people, so I'm going to be a great boss. You know, that's not how it works. The thing that moves us down is sometimes, of course, we're stressed out, we're worried, we're trying to get something done. But I think the fundamental issue here is actually something that starts much, much earlier on the care personally dimension of radical candor. So you want to be more than just professional. You want to bring your whole self to work. And if you are a leader, if you're a manager, You need to create teams on which everybody can bring their whole selves to work, their best selves to work. Because a lot of us don't feel free to be ourselves at work. And beginning to create the kind of psychological safety in which people can be their true selves at work is what's going to help you unleash the true creativity and collaboration on your teams. The problem with just professional is that you're sort of on a slippery slope to apathy. Very often when you're just professional, it kind of gets translated to not caring that much. And the problem with this is that all of us have a friend or foe bit in our brains. And when someone is not a friend, it's very tempting and natural to start unconsciously treating them like an enemy. How many of you have been at companies where things grow, and at first you're like all on one floor, and everybody more or less gets along, and then you move to 2 floors, and all of a sudden the people on the floor above you are stupider and less moral than you are, right? It's like, it's unbelievable how tribal we are. Now, Erik Erikson calls this pseudo-speciation, sort of the feeling that you can degrade other people without conscience. Now, that's kind of a strong word for office politics, but it happens all the time at work, where we start to treat our bosses like tyrants to be toppled. We start to treat our peers like enemy combatants. We start to treat our employees like pawns on a chessboard. We forget that we're all just human beings trying to work together to get something done. And in order to combat this, at the very least, you want to show that you care, that you give it at a very human level about the people who you work with. And when you're really lucky, you actually get to love the people who you work with. Now, not love in the marriage-destroying, HR disaster sense of the word. That's not what I'm talking about here. But like you actually care. You actually have real human relationships at work that give your life meaning and that help you love your work and the people who you work with. Unfortunately, however, the Beatles got it wrong, because love is not all you need. You also need this other dimension of radical candor, the challenge directly dimension of radical candor. This is what I like to think of as the willing to people off dimension of radical candor. So why, it hardly seems worth asking, why are we so reluctant to piss people off? I think the problem here begins not when we are 18 years old, but when we're 18 months old. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Memphis, and my parents, with all the best intention in the world, told me something that I bet all of your parents. So raise your hand if your parents said some version of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? Yeah. This happens, and it happens in every different culture in the country, and there's versions of this saying throughout the world. So this is training that we get from the moment we learn to speak. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Well, now you are a boss, and congratulations, it is your job to say it. And I would argue it's not only your job, but if you really care about the people who you work with, it's actually your moral obligation to say it, to just say it. And it's not only boss to employee, it's also employee to employee. If you care about your colleagues, you need to tell them both the great things they're doing, but also when they're screwing up. And most importantly, it's important to tell your boss. And if you're the boss, it's important to listen to it, to solicit radical candor. Because if you don't know what's really happening in your organization, if you don't know what people are really thinking, you're missing out on what's actually happening. You're headed for a disaster that you're not even aware of. So it's so important, this challenge directly. So that's why radical candor is hard. It's hard because of training that we've had since we were 18 years old, this Be Professional business, and it's hard because of training since we were 18 months old, this if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. One of the things that I've done to try to make it a little bit easier for you and also for me to remember to be radically candid is to think as precisely as possible about what happens when we fail on one dimension or another. So sometimes we do challenge people directly, and we forget to show them that we care about them. We forget to say that I'm going to tell you this thing because I want to help you. And it feels just like you're kicking them in the shins. And that I call obnoxious aggression. Now, when I first started thinking about this, I just called this the quadrant. It seemed like kind of more radically candid, right? And I stopped doing that, though, for a very important reason. Because as soon as I used that word in this framework, people used the framework to start writing names in boxes, right? And I beg of you, don't use this framework that way. This is not about labeling other people. It's not about judging other people. It's not about judging yourself. These are mistakes that we all make. So use this framework like a compass, not like a Myers-Briggs test. Use it like a compass to guide conversations that you're having into a more positive direction. To be aware of when you may be veering into obnoxious aggression, and what can you do to just take a second to show that person that you care about them at a human level. Now, very often when we find that we have been obnoxiously aggressive, the temptation, not just the temptation, but the natural instinct is to move the wrong direction on challenge directly instead of moving the right direction on care personally. And when this happens, we wind up in the worst quadrant of all, manipulative insincerity. This is the false apology. This is the, oh, it's not really that big of a deal, when it is a really big deal. This is backstabbing behavior. This is political behavior. Passive-aggressive kind of behavior happens here in manipulative insincerity, and we're all guilty of it from time to time. 85–90% of mistakes that happen at work happen in this last quadrant, where you do care personally about that other person, where you are genuinely worried about their feelings, about not hurting their feelings. And because you're so worried about not hurting their feelings, you don't tell them something that they really need to know. And this I call ruinous empathy. Ruinous empathy. And it is the downfall of so many great companies, so many great teams, so many great relationships. By the way, this is not only useful at work. Sometimes I'll give this presentation and somebody will come up to me afterwards and say, gosh, if I had just heard this 5 years ago, I wouldn't be divorced right now. So there's ruinous empathy happens in all aspects of our life. One of the mistakes that a lot of people make with radical candor is they think it has to take forever. I got an email from somebody who said, how long do these radical candor therapy sessions have to take? The answer is usually under 2 minutes. These conversations can be very quick. In fact, for me, the origin story of radical candor happened in the space of time it took a light to change on the streets of Manhattan. I had just gotten this puppy, Belvedere, golden retriever puppy, and I adored this dog. I loved her so much that I never said a cross word to her. And as a result, she was totally out of control. So I'm taking her on a walk. She's jumping all over the place. She jumped into the street in front of a speeding cab. I pulled her out of the way just in time. And I'm standing there on the corner of the street with my heart in my throat. And this man, a perfect stranger, looks at me and he says, I can see you really love that dog. That's all he has to do to move up on the care personally dimension. He doesn't have to remember my birthday or the names of all my family members, doesn't have to take me out to lunch. Just seeing somebody in the moment and noticing what they're thinking and how they're feeling and giving voice to it doesn't take long, but that was it. I can see you really love that dog. But, he says to me, you're going to kill that dog if you don't teach her to sit. And then he points to the ground and he says, sit! Dog sat. I had no idea the dog even knew what that meant. And I kind of looked up at him in amazement. And he looks back at me and he says, "It's not mean, it's clear." And then the light changed and he walked off, leaving me with words to live by. It's not mean, it's clear. So that's radical candor. It is not about being mean, but it is about being clear and getting to clarity. So next, obnoxious aggression. I will assert for the record that I am not usually a jerk, but I do sometimes behave like one. And I did research, and I learned that all of you do the same thing from time to time, right? This is a mistake that we all make. So again, shortly after I joined Google, there was, I got in a disagreement with Larry Page, one of the founders, about an AdSense policy. And I sent an email to Larry and about 30 other people that said, "Larry claims he wants to organize the world's information, but if it'll make us a buck, he's willing to create clutter sites that muddle the world's information." Not my most politically astute moment, right? So, and I loved the job. I wasn't trying to get fired. And I actually liked Larry, too. So why did I do that? Why did I do that? It's worth thinking about it for a moment, because a lot of people make the same mistake. I was doing that because I believe, like probably all of you, that there's a special place in hell for people who kiss up and kick down, right? But that doesn't mean doing the opposite is such a brilliant idea either. I was just kicking Larry in the shins because he was so much richer and more powerful than I was. Caring personally is actually something that you owe to every single person who you work with, regardless of where they are in the hierarchy. It's the one thing that common human decency is the one thing that you can show equally to everyone, regardless of their position, regardless of whether there's somebody who just started at your organization a week ago, right out of high school, or whether they're the founder of your company. So remember that, that caring personally doesn't have to take a long time, something you can do with everyone who you work with. Now, the real problem in this case, I actually found out later, Larry thought the email was kind of funny. The real problem was with what happened next. A friend of mine called me up and said, "Kim, why did you send that email? That was incredibly obnoxious." And I thought, gosh, why did I send that email? It was incredibly obnoxious. And so the next time I saw Larry, instead of moving the right direction on care personally, I moved the wrong direction on challenge directly. And I said, "Oh, Larry, I'm really sorry about that email. I was right, you were wrong." Two problems with that. The first problem was that I was lying. I didn't actually think that I was wrong and he was right. And the second problem is that he's got a pretty good BS meter, and he knew I was lying, and he kind of looked at me like I was a pigeon that pooped on his shoulder and stomped off. It was like one of those cringe moments you have in your career. The guy sitting next to me patted me on the shoulder and said, "You know, he likes it better when you disagree with him." So don't make that mistake. When you realize you've upset somebody or that you've been out of line or rude, if you still believe in your heart of hearts what you said in the first place, don't pretend otherwise. Feel free to apologize for your rude behavior, but don't pretend you believe something that you don't believe. So that's manipulative insincerity. Last but not least, ruinous empathy. In order to explain what I mean by this term, I want to share with you probably the most painful moment of my career. I had just hired this guy, we'll call him Bob, and I liked Bob a lot. He was charming, he was smart, he was funny. He would do stuff like this. We were at one of those manager offsites that takes forever. We're all stressed out. We're playing one of those get-to-know-you games that everybody thinks is a total waste of time, but nobody wants to be the jerk who says, "This is a total waste of time, I don't have time to get to know you people." And Bob was the one who was, at least in that way, and Bob was the one who said, "Look, I've got this great idea, and it'll be really fast." Whatever it was, we were down with fast. And Bob says, "Let's just go around the table and share what candy our parents used when potty training us." Weird but fast, we all did it. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would whip out just the right piece of candy for the right person. So Bob was fun. Like, you gotta love working with Bob, right? The only problem, one problem with Bob, he was doing terrible work. Absolutely terrible, sloppy, horrible work. And he would hand stuff into me, and there was shame in his eyes. There was shame. He knew it wasn't good enough. But I was puzzled, by the way. Like, what had happened? I had hired him carefully. He had this amazing resume, all these past accomplishments. I couldn't understand what was going wrong with Bob. I learned much later that the problem was that Bob was smoking pot in the bathroom 4 times a day, which maybe explained all that candy, but anyway. I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew was that Bob was doing this terrible work and handing it into me with shame in his eyes. And because I liked Bob and didn't want to hurt his feelings and didn't want to upset him, I would say something along the lines of, "Oh, Bob, this is a great start. You're so smart. You're so awesome. Everybody loves working with you. Maybe you could make it a little better." And of course, he never did. So let's think for a minute. Why did I behave that way? Mostly it was real ruinous empathy. It was really a problem of me being concerned about his feelings and not wanting to hurt his feelings. So this goes on for 10 months, me not really telling Bob clearly enough that his work is not nearly good enough. And eventually, the inevitable happens. Because the whole team is having to cover for him, redo his work, they're getting increasingly frustrated. And after 10 months, I realized that if I don't fire Bob, I'm going to lose all of my best performers. So I sat down to have a conversation with Bob, which I should have started 10 months previously. And when I was finished explaining to Bob where things stood, he kind of pushed the chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye, and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And now I realize that I have failed Bob in 6 very important and fundamental ways. I have failed to solicit feedback from Bob. I didn't know what was going well from his perspective. And I also didn't know what I was doing that was maybe driving him so crazy that he was forced to toke up in the bathroom 3 times a day. I don't know, and I never will, because I didn't ask. I didn't solicit feedback from Bob. I didn't know what was going on from his perspective. I also failed to give him praise that was meaningful. The kind of praise that I gave him was really just a head fake. It was kind of an ego salve. It wasn't actually meaningful. It didn't give him any real information. And of course, I failed to tell Bob when his work wasn't nearly good enough. But probably worst of all, I failed to create the kind of environment in which everyone would tell Bob what they really liked about working with him and when he was going off the rails. And because I failed Bob in all those different important ways, I'm now having to fire him because of it. I was trying to be nice. It didn't turn out so nice at all. But all I could do in the moment, because even Bob at this point realized it was too late, that he should go. All I could do in the moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again, and that I would do everything I could that helped all the other managers who I worked with to avoid making this mistake that everybody makes from time to time. And that is why I came up with this framework of radical candor, why I wrote the book, and why I'm here talking to you today, because I want to help you avoid those Bob moments. Human behavior change is very difficult. And it's not going to happen. I'd like to think I can come in and talk to you for 30 minutes and voila, radical candor is everywhere. But that's unfortunately not the way it really is going to work. If each of you don't choose something specific that you're going to do differently starting now, like these are small ideas that you can put into practice immediately, then nothing will change. So I wanted to talk about some very specific, concrete things you can do. You don't have to do all these things. Choose the one thing that most resonates for you. So I want to talk about 4 things. First of all, soliciting it. Remember the order of operations I was talking about. You don't want to dish it out until you prove you can take it. You want to lead by example. Next, you want to give it. And let's think about some ways to give it in a way that might make it easier to hear for the other person. Next, you want to gauge it. Radical candor gets measured not at your mouth, but at the other person's ear. But it's kind of hard to know what's going on at somebody else's ear. So what are some things you can do to understand how it's landing, to ask the other person how it's landing? And last but not least, how can you encourage it between other people? How can we all contribute to building a culture of radical candor? So let's start with soliciting radical candor. One of the best times to solicit radical candor is in your one-on-one meeting. And by the way, one of the best ways you as a manager can show you care about the people who work directly for you is to have regular, weekly one-on-one meetings. Spend some time with them alone and talk to them. Now, what you want to do in those one-on-one meetings is mostly listen. You want to get the ideas from them about, you want to learn what's on their mind. You want to get ideas from them about what things could change or whatever. But save a couple of minutes at the end to solicit feedback from people. And the first thing you want to do is figure out how you're going to ask for the feedback. You want to have a go-to question. Because if you say, do you have any feedback for me? I can already tell you what the answer is. Oh no, everything's fine. No feedback for you at all. So you're just wasting your breath to ask that question. So figure out, how are you going to ask for feedback? One of the questions that I like to use, and by the way, feel free to pull out, I think you have some pages, you can take notes. Write a go-to question. If all you do is write down your go-to question and ask somebody after this is a triumphant use of time. So what are you going to ask? How are you going to say it? One of the questions that I like to use is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But I was working with Krista Quarles, who's the CEO of OpenTable, and she said, I could never imagine those words coming out of my mouth. The question I like to use is, tell me why I'm smoking crack, all right? Lots of different ways to ask the same thing, right? It works for her. It got people opened up. The people on her team knew how to take it. So what are the words that you're going to use that will help elicit an answer, some kind of answer? Now, the next thing you need to do is you need to embrace the discomfort. Because you've just kind of dragged someone out on a conversational limb that they had no desire to be out on. And if you jump in and start answering the question for them when they don't say anything, you're not going to learn anything. So you need to learn how to close your mouth, count to 6 in your head. I only just made it to 4, and you are all starting to squirm. Almost nobody can endure 6 seconds of silence. They'll tell you something if you can just remain quiet for 6 seconds. So next, you have to listen with the intent to understand, not to respond. This is a fancy way of saying, don't get defensive. But it's incredibly difficult not to get defensive when someone is offering you criticism. It's the most natural thing in the world. And so you need to go into these conversations when you're asking for criticism prepared really to listen with the intent to understand. Not to defend yourself, not to explain yourself, but just to understand what the other person is thinking. And one of the simplest techniques here is to say, just to check for understanding, what I want to do is repeat back what I think I heard you say. And then repeat it back, not in a sarcastic, that's the dumbest thing anybody ever said to me kind of way, but repeat it back respectfully. And because sometimes somebody will tell you something and you'll totally misinterpret it or over extrapolate. So make sure that you understand what they really said. So now you've dragged someone out on this conversational limb. You've dragged information out of them. You have managed yourself so that you didn't throw a telephone in their face when they told you this thing you didn't really want to hear. That's all good, but it's still not enough. The last thing you need to do is you need to reward the candor. Now, it's pretty easy if you agree with the feedback. Fix the problem. You know, somebody points something out to you and you can fix it. You want to fix it right away, and you want to fix it theatrically. You want to say, so-and-so told me that they hated the black pants I wore. Look at these new blue jeans I bought, or whatever it is. You want to make sure that you tell as many people as possible, as publicly as possible, that this person told you you were doing something wrong, and because they told you that, you changed. You made a change. You fixed the problem. Because you want to make listening tangible. Now, that's not always possible. Sometimes it'll take some time. Now, there will also be times when you get feedback that you just disagree with, that you think is off base, is wrong, and you don't want to act on it. So what do you do in those situations? You can't just say, thank you for the feedback, because that is manipulative insincerity, right? So I think the most important thing that you can do in those cases is, first of all, focus on the 5% of whatever was said that you do agree with. Find something in what was said that you can hook onto and agree with, because that sort of shows that you're open to the feedback, you're not being defensive. And then say, for the rest of it, I want to think about it a little bit and then get back to you. And really do think about it, and then really do get back to them, and offer them a fuller explanation of why you disagree. We can't debate everything endlessly all the time. There's a time to listen, challenge, commit. But very often, if you offer someone an explanation of why you disagree with the feedback, why you're not going to act on it, they're fine. People don't mind if you disagree with them, but if you ignore them, if you make them feel invisible, that's what people really mind. So a full, respectful explanation of why you disagree is a great reward, actually, for feedback. So that's soliciting feedback. Next, let's focus on giving guidance, both praise and criticism. Another criticism I will make of this talk is that I tend to focus a lot on criticism. Radical candor is just as much about praise as it is about criticism. It's just more fun to tell the criticism stories. And the best guidance that I've ever gotten in my career, both on the good side and on the bad side, happened in these impromptu 2-minute talks. These impromptu conversations in between meetings. This is the really good news about radical candor. It's free, first of all, and it's really fast. You don't have to add tons of extra meetings to your calendar, but it does take enormous emotional discipline, and that you each have to reach inside yourself and find that. So, because these 2-minute conversations, we're all busy. You want to be first and foremost, and this is so important, you want to be humble. You might be wrong about your feedback. Be open. When you receive radical candor, especially if it's criticism, don't be defensive. But when you give it, expect the other person to disagree with you. I don't want to compare feedback to a duel, but if you challenge someone to a duel, you don't expect them to lie down and die. You expect them to fire back, right? So expect some disagreement. Expect some energy. And it's okay. Maybe you're wrong. Be open to the possibility that your feedback is incorrect. Next, you want to take a moment to show that you're trying to be helpful, to show your intention. Very often, people feel like you're trying to kick them in the shins, and they're resistant to that. But if you say, I want to tell you something because I think it'll help you change it, or because I care about you, and know what the other person cares about. If they're sort of gunning for a promotion, I know you want to get to the next level. Here's something that will help you do it. I know you want to sell this deal. Here's something that will help you do it. You want to do it right away. The purpose of praise is to help people know what to do more of. The purpose of criticism is to help people know what to do less of. Why would you wait? Feedback has a short half-life, so give it immediately. You want to give it in person. Something like 90% of communication is nonverbal. And so if you're not giving this feedback in person, then you're missing out on 90% of the communication. You won't know how they're reacting, and you won't be able to adjust. A big part of radical candor is just putting your phone in your pocket, looking someone in the eyes and talking to them and seeing them as a full-on human being. You want to criticize in private. You want to praise in public. It seems sort of obvious, but very often when you criticize someone in public, you trigger their lizard brain. And they literally physically cannot hear you, so you're just wasting your breath. So you want to, and there's a difference between debate, which does need to happen in public, and criticism, which needs to happen in private. And there's sometimes a fine line, but it's sort of like if you're saying, oh, there's a typo on page 6, that's fine to say in public. But if you want to tell somebody that they consistently make typos and you're worried they don't care about their work, like that's obviously a conversation you need to have in private. And the reason, there are some people who hate any public mention, so for them you don't necessarily want to praise in public, but most people enjoy the public praise. And it's not really just about sort of feeding their ego, it's also about sharing with the whole team what success looks like. It scales. And last, but definitely not least, you don't want to give praise or criticism about personality. The point here is to show people what they can change. And so for the very same reason that saying to someone, you're a moron, is terrible feedback, saying to them, you're a genius, is also terrible feedback. Like, it's hard. So you want to make sure you're focusing specifically on things that people can change and address, not on these sort of core personality attributes. And it is almost never, the problem with someone's job performance is almost never, sometimes it is, but almost never a core personality attribute. So that's giving radical candor. Next, let's talk about gauging it. Again, radical candor gets measured not at my mouth, but at your ear. But how in the world can I know what's going on in your ear? One of the things that you could do is to take the focus off yourself and focus on what the other person needs. Another thing you can do is you can use this framework to make sure that you're on the right vector. And I'll talk more about this in a moment, explain what I mean by being on the right vector and how to use the framework. And last but not least, having this shared vocabulary, as the question is, do you ever give feedback on feedback? Having a shared vocabulary can be a real shortcut to letting other people know how you feel about the feedback that is happening in the organization. So let's think for a moment about what most of us fear when we have to give somebody feedback, especially if it's critical feedback. We fear that the other person's going to think we're a jerk, right? We fear that we're going to be in the obnoxious aggression quadrant. But if we can let go of that for a moment and focus instead on what they need, now all of a sudden your caring comes through much more naturally because you're not focused on yourself, you're focused on what they need and how you can help them succeed. So another thing that you can do is to gauge the feedback is to choose the right vector. Because one of the most common problems with feedback training is that it kind of implies that if you choose just the right words, the other person will take it well. And that's just not true. So you want to take a moment to see the emotion. By the way, just from your vocabularies, eliminate the phrase, don't take it personally. It's okay. If somebody starts to cry, it doesn't mean that you've said it wrong necessarily, and it doesn't mean that they're not professional. It means they care about their work, and it's natural, it's normal, it's human. So accept a little bit of the emotion and use your reaction to the emotion as a way to show that you care. So don't back off your challenge when somebody seems sad. Now, the other reaction that you might get, even if you start in more or less the right place with the right attitude, is the person might be, that's a very clever graphic for anger. The person might yell at you, right? I'm not an artist. And so what do you do? What do you do if the person starts to yell at you? Because for a lot of us, this is a trigger. Again, the right thing to do, I can see I've made you mad. I can see you're angry. Whatever it is, just take a moment to acknowledge the emotion. Don't try to reject the emotion. And don't try to own the other person's emotion. Don't try to control the other person's emotions. You cannot control another person's emotions. At best, you can control your own emotions. So the other thing that we asked these actors in this role play to do was to get very angry in the course of the role play. And they would yell at their boss, "The fish stinks from the head down." And people would react. They would get so angry. They would go either to obnoxious aggression, and they'd like jump up and say some incredible things back, or they would just shut down. The bosses in the role play would shut down and be manipulatively insincere. They would just cease to engage in a way. So if you can manage your own emotions in response to the other person's anger, then you have a better hope of moving the conversation to a radically candid place. But I mean, if you can't, sometimes we're all going to fail. It's hard when somebody is mad at us not to have an angry response. We all kind of mirror the emotions of the people around us. And part of your job as a leader is to dampen emotions, not to keep stirring the pot. So the most common thing that will happen when you start having these radically candid conversations, in my experience, is kind of that thing that I did to Cheryl. Like, I just wasn't hearing it. I was blowing her off. You're going to get, these are earmuffs. That's what that graphic is. You're going to get somebody who's not listening to you, right? And in this case, you need to move out further than you're probably comfortable moving on the challenge directly dimension of radical candor. You're going to have to say something that's not easy for you to say. You're going to have to keep saying it until you get through to them. And sometimes it's going to feel like picking up a 2x4 and hitting somebody over the head. But your job is to be clear. Your job is to get through to them. But the most common thing I see managers do when this happens is, I tried, what more can I do? It is your job to keep talking until you get through to this person. So that is what I mean by choosing the right vector. Sort of be aware of the flow of the conversation and try to take it to a better place. So last but not least, encourage. What can you do to encourage radical candor between others? This is really your source of leverage, because you work with hundreds of people and you're just one person. If everybody is doing this with everybody else, the culture will become sort of a self-reinforcing flywheel. So one of the most important things you can do is require clean escalation. What I mean by this is just don't let people talk badly about one another behind their backs. Like, clean up your water cooler chat. And then share the ideas with your team. So let me talk for just a moment about clean escalation. I one time had two guys, we'll call them Charlie and Daniel. Charlie and Daniel hated each other. Charlie would come to me talking about Daniel and saying all kinds of terrible things, and Daniel would come to me talking about Charlie. All I wanted was for everybody to get along and do their job. And so I decided I was going to play shuttle diplomat. So I'd go to Daniel and I'd say, Daniel, if you can just change this, this, and this, it'll be much easier for you to work with Charlie. And Daniel's like, I think Charlie's been talking to her about me. And of course he had. And now Daniel pours poison in my ear about Daniel. And so I go run into Charlie. If you can just change this, this, and this. Daniel walks by, he's like, I wonder if they're talking about me. And of course we are. So all I wanted was peace, and all I did was stir the political pot. So don't make that mistake. Don't let people talk badly about each other to you, in any case, but especially not if you're the leader. Ask them, Charlie, did you talk to Daniel? Daniel's the only one who can fix this. And insist that they try. If they can't, the two people can come to you together. And a lot of radical candor is just socially awkward. You gotta kind of get past that. It is awkward to ask two people who are in a fight to come sit in your office and talk it out with you. But you've got to do it, otherwise you just stir the political pot. And you want to be as fair and fast as possible. I worked with one CEO who said, when two people on my team can't resolve something, then what I do is I choose the worst solution for both of them. And that was the last time anybody ever came to him with a problem. So, part of your job as leaders, it may be your least favorite part of the job, but it is part of your job, is conflict resolution. So you've got to help people resolve their conflicts. Last but not least, share the ideas with your team. The 2x2 framework is pretty easy. Share it with them. You can always get a copy of the book at the library or even buy one. Not that this is a sales pitch, but it's a great book, I like to think. So share it with the people on your teams. But most importantly, the best thing you can do is not to tell the people on your teams my stories, but tell them your stories. Think about what is your story. What's the moment in your career when you got feedback that helped you for the rest of your life, that helped you succeed in your career? And share that story with your teams, because then you're opening yourself up. You're showing a little vulnerability. You're letting your team get to know that you know you're not perfect, and that when we tell each other about mistakes, that we are actually helping each other succeed. We're not just kicking each other in the shins. So I am now between you and drinks. And that's not a place I want to be for very long. So I'm gonna say thank you very much, and I'll take questions out at the reception. Thank you.